Hello, everyone. Uh, Thanks for signing in to my All Things Tech Leadership. This is the first event for the year 2025. I took a break for a few weeks. I traveled to India and took a break from weekly podcast for a few weeks. So I had to brush up on the sequence of items that I normally announce before coming into this podcast. But I'm excited today. Today, we are going to talk about strategic partnerships. And Mark is an expert in that. But before I introduce Mark, and this is, by the way, I'm excited for this topic because over the course of my business career, the last 8 years at Dellens, I've had several partnerships with service providers and marketing agencies. And I know good partnerships can make or break a business. So I am excited. I never formally thought about what it takes to build a strategic partnership, but I know one when I see one that's good, and it can catapult your business to the next level if done correctly. So I am super excited to learn from Mark uh, all what it takes to build a great partnership. But uh, before we introduce Mark and the topic, a few administrative items. Firstly, this is an AMA event, Ask Me Anything event. So any questions regarding partnerships is game here. You can ask any question. There are two ways to ask a question. One, if you're signed up, if you're joining us live, there is a text box at the bottom of your screen, whether it's on the laptop or on your phone. You can simply type in your question there. Your question will be visible to both Mark and myself. I'll keep an eye on it and interrupt the flow of our conversation as we will give priority to questions from the audience. The second way, if you prefer a more personal approach or anonymous approach, feel free to go to my profile and send me a direct message. Uh, if a question comes in that format, I'll be on the lookout for notifications from LinkedIn. I will then read out the question and Mark can answer that question. So those are the two ways. So, and by the way, we love questions. We love questions. So feel free to ask any of them. This is several firsts, this podcast. Number one, it's my first guest talking about partnerships, strategic partnerships. I normally have uh, leaders in product or engineering, but this is a super exciting topic, and this is my first. This is, of course, the first event in 2025. This is also the first live event at 4 p.m. Central. I normally hold this event at 11 a.m. Central, but maybe if it's towards the end of your day, you can catch it live. But it, all these events are recorded, will be pushed to both LinkedIn and YouTube on my Dellens YouTube channel, so you can review it after the event as well. So with that administrative item behind us, I'm going to introduce myself and then I'm going to introduce Mark very briefly, and then I let Mark do the honors of elaborating on his background. So myself, B2B founders and tech companies with revenues less than 50 million struggle to innovate, grow, and scale due to lack of access to experienced tech leadership. At Dellens, we directly address this problem, this challenge, with our uh, fractional CTO service, where we provide experienced tech leaders without the need for the customer to commit to a full-time hire. We have been in business for 8 years, since 2016. We have several consultants across the country in multiple verticals. I myself, my background, I have 20 years of tech leadership experience across multiple technology companies and startups, including having 2 startups of my own. So that's a little bit about myself. Mark, as I said, is a powerhouse in strategic partnerships. He is an expert in identifying, creating, and most importantly, ensuring that the partnership is a success. So, with that extremely brief introduction, Mark, tell us more about how you got into the world of partnerships and your background and what led you into the world of partnerships.
Yep.
Over to you.
Happy to be here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening in, whether live or after the fact. I'm happy to be here. So my background is strategic partnerships. I've been doing this for 20 years at large and small organizations, really oriented around how do we take what we have and how do we take what our partners have and bring them together to create more than the sum of its parts. The goal is to create a win-win-win scenario, a win for us, a win for our partners, and ultimately a win for the consumers. That's what you need to create the win-win for all the other folks. I've done this at places like Shopify, Fandango, Madison Square Garden, a bunch of startups in between, and built long-term, year-long, multi-year, very strategic relationships with companies like TikTok, Google, Microsoft, Walmart, Warner Brothers, and others across the tech and media space. And so that's what I bring to the table today, and hopefully folks can learn something. And I'm excited to answer some questions.
Awesome. No, thank you for that introduction. So, what are the elements of a good partnership? What makes it successful?
Yeah, the key is both companies have to have something of value that the other one wants. And it has to be a priority. So there's lots of scenarios where it's a really good idea and both people like the idea, but if it's not a priority, if it's not a strategic priority for the organization, you're just going to keep having conversations about what a good idea it is as opposed to moving forward and implementing it. So that's really the key to start with, is figuring out what is a priority for your potential partner. What are they focused on? What's going to make them successful? How can you deliver that for them? That's sort of step one. And then you can figure out what they can do for you in return. And that's the foundation of that partnership. And in an ideal world, you've also found someone you can grow that partnership with. So it's not a one-time, let's just do this one thing together, but you've got an eye on 10 other business units that potentially could also benefit from the relationship if things go well and go smoothly.
Yeah. And I like the aspect of priority, because I've had when I was working around 10 years ago for a SaaS startup, that's exactly what happened. It was a good idea. It was something in our strategic vision 5 years hence. And it's something that we were, and I was involved. It's funny you describe it. It's exactly the way you did it. I was involved. I was a point person from a technology perspective, and I would be in weekly meetings, but we would not move the needle anywhere. So I know exactly what you mean. So I've experienced that firsthand. So can you walk us through a challenging deal you negotiated and how you kind of navigated that, just to get a sense of what you have to go through to get a successful partnership?
Yeah, sure thing. Before I do that, I want to touch on the last point you made, though, just a quick story. So about prioritization. And when I was working at one of my companies, and we were working on a deal with Facebook, and I had met my counterpart on the phone a couple of times, but I was in Menlo Park. We sat down for a cup of coffee, and he actually asked me point blank. We sat down. He goes, "Mark, what can I do to help you get promoted?" And that's the undertone of many conversations you're going to have with people. But I loved that he was just so blunt and honest of like, this is how I'm going to help you win. How do I help you win? Because that's where the core of the partnership is going to start. Right. And I will never forget the conversation. It meant so much to me. He's still a contact and someone that I've continued to reach out to periodically, because it was refreshing to have that directness and that honesty. And it really unlocked sort of how you make partnerships work, right? You want to make the other person as successful as possible. and that's going to be defined by their priorities.
No, I love that. I love that. I should do that more with my own customers. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
fine.
It's not just partnerships, right? And anyone that you're working with, if you can help them get promoted, they're going to be a great relationship for you.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I can see that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So challenging deal you asked about. I can think of one, and I'm hesitant to mention specific names of organizations, but I was working on a really big integration between two major tech companies. And it was a commerce and social media and tech and payments integration. And there was one thing we were stuck on where, to put it bluntly, like both sides had religion that they both needed to control that one thing, and we couldn't reach an agreement on that. And so the way we ultimately resolved it is conversation. Like, you have to keep asking questions, you have to keep digging into the specifics and understanding, okay, if this is religion for you and this is religion for us, why is it religion, right? What is the important thing? And after a bunch of rounds of conversation, we found the unlock. And we were able to figure out, well, it's not this, it's this one sliver of it that's actually the part that we care the most about. But until you have those conversations, sometimes over and over again, you can't get to the real truth of what it is. And that speaks to another important part of partnerships, like honesty and trust. You have to be able to tell the person what it is that you specifically want and what you don't want. And you have to trust that they're not going to do anything malicious with that information. Because you have to be open enough to share that. But if you can, then you can get to the root of issues. You can get to the root of problems and actually unlock and then get a deal signed and launch that deal and actually deliver value for all of your stakeholders.
Yeah. It appears the process involves a lot of conversations and negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
What is the keys? What are a couple of key skills to be a successful partnership leader, if I may call that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important ones is curiosity. You have to have a true interest in what the partner is doing and what they care about, and understand their business, understand their business model, be willing to go deep on how their company is run and what makes them successful, in order to be able to find the places where you can have an impact, right? You can go in with the assumption of, this is what we do and this is how we can help you. But if you don't truly understand their business through those conversations, then you may be missing the real opportunity. So being curious, being able to ask the right questions, being able to understand exactly how their business function is how you unlock where those opportunities are.
In your introduction, you talked about Shopify, you mentioned Facebook, you mentioned startups, you mentioned a wide variety of companies you have done with, but at the same time, you talk about being curious and understanding their business. It's a wide variety of businesses you worked with.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do it?
There's sort of a two-sided answer. One is I just constantly being curious and wanting to learn and wanting to understand. But sort of the flip side of that is you start to see patterns, right? At the end of the day, there's only so many business models, right? One person has to pay for something, and then the people who contribute to that something all have to share in that revenue, right? And there's lots of different ways to do that, but at its core, that's business, right? And so, starting to see the patterns between these types of business also helps you get up to speed quicker and helps you figure out how to unlock where those opportunities lie.
Right. No, it's like I'm trying to relate it to technology.
Mm-hmm.
You can be industry agnostic, you can be size agnostic. The challenge is, I worked at both startups and large organizations and a variety of verticals. From a technology standpoint, it seems similar to partnership. It is industry agnostic. The core issues are the same. This is what you're saying.
Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, but you also talk about understanding the business in depth.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's from a business perspective, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to necessarily, and again, there's caveats to this, right? Like I've not worked in like healthcare tech, and I wouldn't, because there's so much specific vertical nuance there that I'm not going to pretend that I can come in and be an expert, right? Like it's just not my space. And there's a handful of other sectors like that. But broadly speaking, It's really about understanding, what your company wants, what you're trying to solve for, what you have to offer, and then the flip side, what does that look like on the partner side? And then it's building relationships at the end of the day, right? Once you have that framework, it's building relationships, it's building trust, it's building understanding. And then over time, that relationship grows into a truly meaningful relationship and partnership.
When I do all the things that you say, can a relationship or partnership still be transactional, and as opposed to truly strategic, or does it can that work? Because it benefits me, it benefits the customer, it benefits each other. There's financial, monetary exchange. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, at least, the way that I make that distinction is the transactional relationship typically involves one person just paying money to the other person, right? Whereas the strategic relationship often is a exchange of assets in some way, right? Access to data, APIs, customer lists, marketing assets, whatever that may be. It's also oriented around how do you drive growth in the priorities as opposed to just sell more customers, for lack of a better term, right?
Got it.
That's the way that I usually think about that distinction, but
Sure.
others may disagree.
Sure. This for those listening in live is a reminder that this is an AMA event, Ask Me Anything event. So you've got a sense of what Mark's background is. So feel free to type in questions either on the chat window or direct message me. But in the meantime, we will continue our conversation. Mark, you how you've been doing partnerships for several years now. How has it changed from when you started to where the partnerships are today? What has changed and what is the same?
I wouldn't say a lot has changed. I mean, certainly the tech that we're working with has evolved dramatically.
Of course.
Early in my career, I was on a niche SVOD sports service before anyone had heard of the terms niche SVOD services, right? So, the industries have certainly evolved, the technology has evolved, but the path to partnership, I would argue, hasn't changed dramatically at all. It's still about understanding what your partner needs, understanding what their priorities are going to be. That's sort of universal and timeless. You can probably take that back much longer than our careers and still see how that works and how that operates, right? You have to be solving problems for your partners, and they have to be solving problems for you. Otherwise, there isn't a real relationship, or to your previous term, it's much more transactional in that scenario.
Yeah. So that is core. If AI will find it difficult to take on your job because you need
maybe, right? Like we don't know where AI is ultimately going to be headed in terms of what it can do. I mean, I certainly leverage it in my work today. It can be a shortcut to starting a document. It can be a shortcut to doing industry research, right? When I work with clients and I'm trying to get up to speed on their space, on who their competitors are, on who their potential partners are, it can be a quick shortcut to start building a list. It's not going to replace primary research, but it can certainly help you along the way. Yeah. Is there a world where my AI agent is talking to my counterpart's AI agent and they're figuring out how to exchange assets? Sure.
It's possible. Possibly. they might be able to ask the question more directly.
Right. Well, they can ask 50 questions at the same time, right? They can do it more efficiently. Whether they can do it effectively will be the ultimate test.
Absolutely. How do you measure? Is there the success of is there a metric you pursue to measure the success of a partnership and that evolves over time?
Yeah. At the core, you're ultimately still trying to drive bottom line for your business, right? Mm-hmm. Like you need to find a way to deliver, either top line value or bottom line savings or profits for your organization. That's the true measure of whether the partnership is going to be successful. That's primary. Secondarily, though, you can certainly see, your partner has to be successful, right? If you're successful and they're not, the partnership is going to end. So you haven't really accomplished as much. You can also look at the longevity of the relationship. and you can look at the depth of the relationship over time. So, for example, when I was at Fandango, we were working with Google, and when I started, we just had an integration into Google Search. 4 years later, we had integrations with Google Maps, with Assistant, with Google Pay, with Google Play. And we had an annual summit where our execs would fly up to Mountain View every year and sit down with Google execs and talk through strategy for the year, right? Like that didn't happen in years 1 or 2. So those are sort of more qualitative measurements of, is this a successful relationship? Is this a successful partnership? And that just continue to give us opportunities to open doors and find new avenues to work with that partner.
Right. And in year 1, you said there's a partnership has to be win-win for both parties.
Mm-hmm.
So when you partner with a company like Google on year 1, their incentives or prioritization might be different than, say, in the example you gave, Fandango, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to find the priority. You still
Mm-hmm.
have to you have to dig and find out what would make it a priority for Google in that case in year 1. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Every time.
Every day.
Yeah. And I'll note, and sometimes it's not there, or sometimes the exchange isn't fair. So we had one partner that we were working with, and we were really excited about it. But at the end of the day, what they wanted was more than we were willing to give. And so you also have to know when to say no, right? As exciting as it is, and as sexy as it can be to work with these gigantic names within the tech space, and say, oh man, if we could just get access to all, millions of people on that platform, if there's not a fair value exchange, and if it's not going to ultimately be the right move for your business, you have to know that it's when to say no, and B, and it's okay to say no, but B, I think even more importantly for the purposes of the relationship, right? It's often a temporary no, and you have to be able to explain why, right? The partner needs to understand, this is what's important to us. This is why we can't move forward. Because you don't know what they're going to come back with now, and B, you don't know what they're going to come back with in the future. And so it's an always evolving relationship, and you have to be ready to have those conversations, have the hard conversation to say no, understanding that may limit opportunities in the short term, but in the long term, it should position you much better.
Right. So in these partnership discussions, there is also, I would imagine, cultural differences between one organization to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you take into account and consider in your partnership discussions? And give us a story around that.
Absolutely. And I think the folks like ourselves who are the partnerships executives in that position, like we're the bridge between those cultures at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. To go back to your earlier question about qualities that you need, I think there is a level of being malleable that's also required, because you're going to be talking to people from other organizations who have different cultures, right? And it can be as simple as like they only use Slack and they never use email, and so you have to adjust to how you communicate with them. Or it can be obviously a lot more complex, right? They're always responding to you at night, and they're always looking for responses by the morning, right? Or the way that they work, or what their expectations are, or again, where they have religion about certain needs in a deal structure, right? Like you have to be malleable, and you have to be able to bridge that, so the organizations can be successful together. So
sure.
Your organization doesn't all have to be malleable, but you have to be able to know. And so when you pull in your head of marketing, or you pull in your head of product to work with this organization, like you have to prepare them. You have to say, hey, this is how they work. This is what they're going to expect. This is what we need to deliver. We got to make sure we're okay with that. And so that's certainly a large part of the deal making process.
Yeah. So what is the one piece of advice you would give a founder who is looking to build a partnership?
Mm-hmm. I think it's two things.
Okay.
So number one is you have to really know who your customer is and why they're buying your product, because that will help you identify the right partners. So if you know it at a surface level, there's a lot of obvious partners out there, but they may not perform for you because you're not being specific enough about the scenario. So that's number one, is you really have to know your customer. You have to have that product market fit in order to be able to then go and have partnership conversations with the right people. And then number two, it's figure out how to make your partner successful and understand that will come back to you. But focus on, how do I make that partner thrive? How do I make that partner succeed? And how do I make that partner successful? And understand that will come back to you. But focus on, how do I make that partner thrive? And understand that will come back to you. But focus on, how do I make that partner thrive? And understand that will come back to you. But focus on, how do I make that partner they'll be your best friend and they will return it to you tenfold if you can do that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a great piece of advice. We have got a few more minutes remaining, 5 minutes specifically. Talk to us about your company. Talk to us how you got started with your fractional strategic partnership. How did you get started? Why did you get started? And what does it do?
Yeah. So I left the corporate world about a year and a half ago. I had just grown frustrated with the bureaucracy and the politics and the,
Now hold on. That's surprising you're saying that, because in strategic partnerships you have to deal with that every
you
day,
do
right?
have to deal with it, but I'm dealing with it in a different way.
Of course, of course.
And it's little things like not having to worry about which 20 people to copy every time you send an email or Slack message,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure.
So I launched my own practice about a year and a half ago, and where I really focus is startups in the tech and media space who are in the, call it $5 to $50 million a year revenue range. That's the sweet spot. That's where you've now found that product market fit. Your sales are humming. You know who you're selling to, and you can have really productive partnership conversations. And so I typically come in, do a scoping exercise, figure out, what do we have? What are we trying to solve for? Who do we want to work with? Start having those conversations and find out what they want. And then from there, start to build relationships and build partnerships. And so I effectively operate as a fractional head of partnerships for companies that are growing, that are not ready to hire somebody who's full-time yet.
I got a question on my LinkedIn.
Sure.
The question is cryptic. Let me just read it out. If you're listening in and you want to elaborate the question, why do you really need why do I need to have a formal partnership? Can't I just use the API and proceed without a formal partnership? That's a question.
Sure. That's a great question. So
okay, good.
You can start that way for sure, right? So there's lots of publicly available APIs where you can get access to bits of data, bits of functionality, and then you can use that as a starting point. 100%, no question. You will reach a point though where that's not enough, and there's opportunities that are missed because not everything is in the public API, not all the functionality is there, or you want different terms, right? Maybe this data is free, or you want it cheaper, or you want it in another way. Or you have enough scale where you can go to them and ask/demand for different terms or different functionality or upgrades to that API or whatever the case may be. You can also potentially leverage that API partner to be a sales channel. If you're just an integration, that's fine, and that may work for you. But if you can build a relationship and now they can also refer clients to you because you're integrated, that becomes a lot more powerful. So there's lots of different ways to build on that. But yes, an API integration is a great way to start, prove that there's value between the two organizations, and potentially even get your foot in the door.
Right. And that is a way to, as an entry point, to tell what you can offer your partner. Mm-hmm. And if you've already proven it on a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fantastic. No, that thank you for that question. I didn't fully actually when I read it the first time. Thanks for elaborating on the answer. When I read it, I did think in those terms. But no, that is thank you for that question. So, is there any as we wrap up the session, Mark? Besides partnership, what do you do for fun?
I mostly drive my kids around to various activities. That's a large part of it. Like many folks, I've also gotten pretty heavily into pickleball. My dad started playing 3 or 4 years ago in his retirement community. He plays like 6 days a week. And so a couple of years ago, I was visiting him and I was like, okay, I'll come play with you. And I love it. And I've got a group of dads here that I play with now. And we're also a big skiing family. So we try to get up into the mountains as much as we can in the wintertime.
Awesome.
My oldest boys are excellent skiers, which is really fun.
My kids are grown up. They don't need shuttling. They can drive now. They don't need to be shuttled anymore. I used to do a lot of that in the years past, but that's great. Well, if you are, for those listening in, and if you are looking to scale your business through strategic partnerships, you can call upon Mark. So thank you, Mark, for coming in on as a guest to our first podcast of the year. It was a pleasure hosting you. I learned quite few things. I learned you have to understand what you can offer, uh, and you have to make it a priority. So that's a great tip, among others that you provided. But thank you for coming on the show. It was a pleasure hosting you, and until next time, very best to you. Do you have any final comments to provide to the audience?
No, I appreciate it. If people want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email. It's just my last name at Gmail. So if you can spell it correctly, you can find me. Appreciate being here. Happy to answer questions in the future as people are thinking through how to make these types of partnerships work. If when they do work, they deliver a tremendous amount of value to an organization. It's what I love. It's what I love doing.
Absolutely, and I can attest for that from personal experience. So that's great. Well, thanks for all your time, Mark. Have a great day, and thanks for listening in. I appreciate the questions that came through. So have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.